Walk-ons ending, and credit here to Trojan Fight. Now the NCAA trying to remove walk-ons because of abuse of NIL. That's exactly right. What we read in the article from Athlon Sports is that the NCAA is trying to figure out if they can get rid, well, I guess if they should get rid of walk-ons because of how teams are abusing NIL. We talked about it with the Michigan sanctions that could come, where we talked about, like, would it even mean anything if they gave them a scholarship reduction? Because Michigan's NIL could just say, we'll pay your school for you, right? So at the end of the day, like, just come on, be a walk-on, and we'll pay your school for you. And we know there are tons of other schools that are doing this, not because of reductions, but just in general with walk-ons. To me, this would be one of the worst possible things that could happen to college football. To me, this would absolutely solidify that college football is becoming the NFL. This would be worse than a playoff structure where it's the Big Ten versus the SEC. This would be worse than, contracts for players, all this kind of stuff. I mean, walk-ons ending, and for somebody like Matt Rhule, his quote, if you're not watching on YouTube, his quote on Sirius XM, I think it was on that Danny Cannell show on Sirius XM, he was asked about it, and he says, "I think it'd be awful for every player that ends up with a high-end commercial. There are 100 players that are, becoming better people by having played college football and being part of a team." And he goes on to talk about how, a lot of these players go on to, run things in business and maybe be politicians and do great things, and many of them will credit their experience in college football for why they're able to do those things. I have a lot more thoughts on this, but Max, I'm going to kick it to you first. What's your reaction? What is your thoughts? The NCAA threatening to get rid of walk-ons in reaction to the possibility of teams paying the walk-ons way and not using scholarships.
Yeah, I think, they frame it up as like, well, teams are gonna, there's skirting the rules, and there's gonna be some, teams are doing some things kind of under the table and avoiding the scholarship numbers. And it's like, well, it all comes back to they just don't want to have to pay as many players with revenue sharing and all that. So it seems like, I mean, it's all about money, obviously, at the end of the day, for the NCAA. And yeah, like, I think Matt Rhule is pretty much spot on. Like, how many guys at Rutgers are going to be doing this, or at a Northwestern, or at a Fresno State? Like, I don't see how this affects the mass majority of college football. And I think, if a couple teams are going to be doing this, or players want to do this, I don't know all the ins and outs about the rules around scholarships and the protections that it affords. Like, I know if you are on scholarship and you have to medically retire, you still have your scholarship available, and they can't take that away from you. So if you're going to, as a player, take on that risk and say, yeah, I'll skip a scholarship and just take NIL money, and you get hurt, can they pull that? I don't know. Like, that, there's a lot of unanswered questions, and it seems like a lot of risk for the player. But if you assume the risk, then I don't know. I think it's up to the teams at that point.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yankee, I apologize. Oof, I was afraid Michigan sanctions wouldn't come up tonight. It's not about that. It's just a reference back to another episode. I apologize, Yankee. I wasn't trying to make it all about that. And then Philip, Braden Burlsworth, yes, Arkansas, the Arkansas player. I have a list of more guys I was gonna name off, but I felt like I was talking a lot at the beginning. So if anybody else has a name that you want to list out there, feel free. But Russ, just your thoughts on this whole situation.
Yeah, Devin Mockabee, right? Our running back star for Purdue. He's a walk-on. He wouldn't have happened if that was the case. But yeah, I'm in lockstep with you all on this. This is overregulation. This is the same thing that NCAA has been doing for a while now, that have people tired of the NCAA, and it's like they're trying to nail their own coffin shut. Like, it's, I get from a competitive standpoint, they're trying to overregulate and say, hey, we don't want these teams to be stacked. Especially you look at like those UCLA teams and, with Wooden that had that dynasty. The reason they had that dynasty, part of it was because they went like 20 deep because there was no scholarship limit, and they just went. So they're trying to avoid that. But like, this isn't the 60s and 70s anymore. Like, everybody's on TV. Everybody wants their shot. You can only see a team get so stacked before that player is going to go, hey, I want my shot elsewhere. So, I don't think there's any need for this whatsoever.
Zach, I think I know where you're going with this, and I think you have a catchphrase for it. So go ahead.
I'm just saying, Big Ten Huddle t-shirt. The NCAA stinks. That's it. It's done. Okay. In all seriousness, if the NCAA just did their job in the beginning, which is to actually regulate the sport, and this is going to your point, Russ, if they actually did their jobs when NIL and the transfer portal came to be, we are not having this discussion. But instead, they just do stupid things all the time and never actually do anything that benefits the teams, the programs, the players. And now we're in this mess where people can take advantage of this. And it's like, oh, you know what we should do? We should cut walk-ons. No, regulate the dang sport. Like, this is absurd. Like, I don't, how can people be so incompetent in their jobs and still they don't have influence. They're a laughing stock, and yet they can still make decisions that are going to impact the sport in a negative way. I'm tired of this sham organization basically running amok when they want to and then doing nothing when they need to. It's a joke. It's absolutely a travesty if this is what they do, and they should go the way of the dinosaur if that's what they do.
Well said, Zach. I'm gonna be honest. If this happens, I think this might be what sparks the Big Ten and the SEC saying, "Forget you, NCAA." And I think that the Big 12 and everybody else would go right along with them, and this is what would kill the NCAA. Now, I don't think they would do this because I think at the end of the day, they realize just how stupid it would be and just how much nobody would go along with it. I think you might have a year or two with no walk-ons because, things might have to get organized. Like if this happened tomorrow, we'd still play this season with the NCAA in charge and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, like if they made this happen tomorrow, I fully expect the Big Ten and the SEC to say, hey guys, we're breaking off. If you guys want to come with us, come meet us in Indianapolis, right in front of the NCAA headquarters. And so that way we can, show them how much we hate them and we'll talk about how we're going to leave them. I mean, Max, am I right here? Like, do you think if this happened, this is what would really spur the Big Ten and the SEC's removal of the NCAA in college football?
I mean, it'd be a pretty good reason. And it'd just be another, it'd be another example of like, well, what else are they going to do to just make another terrible decision in the future? Like what, they're going to want to avoid other headaches like this. And yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. I mean, I totally agree with you, Zach. Like, it's just, it doesn't help anything.
Russ, have you ever met a person who is mindless, stupid, and incompetent all at the same time? And if so, was their name NCAA?
Well, I don't want to. He's in the comments, and I don't want to hurt any feelings. So. No, no, it's kind of like Zach was, piggybacking off what I said. It's the NCAA doesn't want to stop it at the root; they want to treat the symptoms, right? And if you want to go down a rabbit hole, look at some of these committees that make these decisions. Like, look at the names on there. Go back to the College Football Playoff Committee last year, right? Like, look at how many people are on these committees that are not athletic minds, right? That are deans and chancellors and educators. I get it. It's student. It's they're student athletes. I get it. It's like these are schools. These are educational, places that are having sports on the side. But like, Painter was a part of the committee that discussed the one-time transfer rule when it first came up, right? There was like 14 people in the room, him and one other coach, and then 12 educators. Well, what happened when it came time to vote? They kick the coaches out and then they vote on it. And then they wonder why this crap happens. And then they want to, scramble around and treat a symptom and go, oh, let's do this, let's do that. Like, no, like they're always wrong from the very source. They don't want to focus on what they're doing wrong at the source. They want to focus on when it gets out of hand, trying to put their fingers in the hole in the dam and try to stop everything. And it doesn't work. And it's going to eventually all collapse. But we're Big Ten. This is the Big Ten huddle, so we'll be on the inside. We'll be the haves, not the have-nots when that happens.
Well, we're going to talk about how the Big Ten is the haves and the have-nots here in a second, and how much so the Big Ten and another conference in the SEC really could just say peace and forget you. So, Russ, I thought this was hilarious at the beginning. Dylan said, "If you say me, Help me,
I didn't
God.
say any names. I didn't say
You
any.
son of a gun. Now send me the link. He's ready. He's ready.
I'm picturing on horseback riding to the podcast area, like
he's ready
to the podcast, pony.
Max, you're somebody from your podcast is having a good time tonight. You just described the state of Iowa, so there we go. Some good rivalry banter in there. Big Ten West rivalry banter. Zach, any final thoughts on this terrible subject before we move on?
I think Max and Russ tied it up with a bow. The NCAA stinks. Either progress or get out of the way.
Scott brought up this is a good point by Scott, and I apologize, Max. I'm like blocking you with these comments. I really need to find a different way to do this here. But I do remember this coming up, and I didn't know if I should bring it up or not. But since Scott brought it up, Kirby Smart at Georgia said he'd be totally fine with this. And one of the reasons why Kirby Smart would be totally fine with this is because if this happened, the teams that already run their teams like a pro team, i.e. Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, Oregon, all these other teams that just pay all of their players so much money, which I'm an Ohio State fan saying this right here, like this would benefit them. But me as an Ohio State fan saying, I don't care if it would benefit my team. I care more about college football in this scenario and the sanctity of what college football is rather than, let's make it more like NFL. So that way Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, all these teams can do really well. Most of the SEC really, they've been paying players for 20, 30 years. Anyway, but yeah, that's the whole premise there with guys like Kirby Smart. And it just, at a certain point, you start to care more about your program than you do about college football overall, which don't get me wrong, I get that, but we have to remember what built our programs and, what they came from with how they are what they are today. A guy like Xavier Johnson, which, maybe nobody that's not an Ohio State fan knows who that guy is, but he was a walk-on for Ohio State that was playing. He was a wide receiver playing running back against Georgia 2 years ago in the playoffs because Ohio State had all their running backs hurt. Because at the end of the day, you needed somebody who would say, "Yeah, coach, I'll go in there and be running back for you." And it was the walk-on wide receiver who was like your seventh string running back who was then lining up in the backfield. Just absolutely crazy. So, yeah, Scott, programs like Georgia can stack 4 and 5 stars, I guess, would have the advantage. They would. Programs like Nebraska rely on walk-ons and lower rated players who they can actually develop and bring them up to, maybe they aren't going to be first round draft picks, but they're going to be really darn good college football players. There's a lot of programs like that out there with Nebraska. So